Hello, welcome to Black Horizons. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. This afternoon we're coming to you live on location from the conference site of the Holiday Inn in Halifax. This weekend, the conference of the National Black Coalition of Canada. I have with me two very distinguished guests. We're going to be discussing the Middle East situation with particular reference to the Palestinian situation and the involvement in this issue by the black community, particularly in the United States. My guest from the NSACP, Louis J. Carter, who's the National Labor Director for the NSACP. Mr. Carter's here and will be the keynote speaker in the conference this weekend. And Dr. Ishmel Zied, who's a resident of Halifax, Dartmouth, who's a Palestinian and a member of the Canadian-Palestinian situation. First, Louis, I want to go to you, and perhaps you can give us some context for our discussion this afternoon. The Andy Young resignation about late in the summer, I guess it was, in August, has triggered off a whole set of developments in the black community. The black community at the time of the resignation came out in very strong opposition to that resignation. And of course, also following out of that has been the involvement of the black community in the whole Middle East question. What has the resignation of Andy Young meant to the black community?
Let me try to respond in this manner, and I think maybe what I better do first is to indicate to you that I don't consider myself an expert on the Middle East question, but I think I can probably put generally into focus some of the things that really occurred. The first notion that the black community had that Andrew Young was going to submit his resignation had tremendous reverberations throughout the black community. There was an inference initially that this resignation was being pressured by the Jewish community, which caused some problems. I can indicate to you, being in New York City when this came up, the New York Post took upon itself to suggest that Andrew Young under fire, Jews want him out. There may be some differences of opinion on that, but the average person in the street read it and you started getting some feelings, some strong feelings. My notion is that some of that has to a degree subsided, but Andrew Young was viewed as a point person in terms of establishing a redirection and a refocus on the part of the United States administration toward third world concerns. So we saw him as a very valuable asset in his function and in his role toward redirecting and refocusing an emphasis on the part of the U.S. government toward concerns that we in the black community had all the time, but the previous administrations had not focused in the value that they have once Andrew was on board.
I wonder if you might be able to bring us up to date in terms of how we got from a situation where the black groups came together to protest the resignation to the situation whereby a number of prominent blacks from the large organizations in the United States came to visit the Middle East. There was the Jessy Jackson delegation, the SCLC delegation, the later delegation of the NSACP, your organization, and other groups have gone to the Middle East. What triggered
the call for black leadership was extended by the NAACP. Our director, Benjamin Hooks. That meeting took place with well over 200 leaders of a variety of institutions in America, met at our headquarters. Clearly, the first item on that agenda was to condemn the manner in which Andy Young was relieved of his responsibilities. Secondly, it was very clear that there was going to be some contribution from black civil rights leadership toward identifying with what was at that point in time considered a no-talk policy of the U.S. administration. You've got to remember that Andrew Young had to leave his job because he saw the validity in talking to the Palestinian community. We concur with that, still concur with that. And it was that at the outgrowth of that meeting, Reverend Lowry, the chairperson of the SCLC, and Jessy Jackson had indicated clearly that they would be making trips to the Middle East. The initial hope was to meet with all representatives. And as you well know, they were successful in meeting with the members of the Palestine and Egyptian community, but were shunned by Menachem Begin for whatever some reasons he may have had. We declared at the climax of that meeting that they had that right, that individual right, to take upon themselves any form of dialogue and communication that they felt would be essential to undermining what we considered a no-talk policy that was subscribed only to the Palestinians. So that's how that emerged.
I want to go back to you in a minute and talk a little more about the NSACP's position on the Palestinian question, but I'd like to follow the developments, the rejection of the Jackson delegation and the subsequent acceptance of the NSAP delegation. Do you think that this was perhaps a ploy on the part of the Jewish community to try to splinter the black community?
That's going to be hard to judge at this particular point in time, but the question does make me a bit uneasy individually. Let me also try to get another kind of focus on that particular meeting. That was not inspired by the NAACP. The record would indicate at this point in time that there was an agreement between the AFL-CIO and the Hizadaran, which is the Jewish labor community,
yes,
to have this meeting. It was primarily led by William Pollard, who's the civil rights director of the AFL-CIO, who was joined in by Byron Rustin, and representatives from the Urban League, as you indicated, and the NAACP joined. I personally would indicate to you that if that option was provided to me, I would not have gone for a set of reasons. On the other hand, I suppose the position of the association would be that we've got to keep levels of communication going. But I would want to make it very clear that that particular trip was not inspired by the association, although our members from the Washington Bureau did go.
This leads me to another question. I think one of the difficulties we have to deal with here in Canada, and we're glad for the opportunity to be able to talk to you, Louis, so that we can set the record straight, hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak, but we rely very heavily on press reports. And for example, the Time article, I think, gave us the impression that the delegation had been almost initiated by the NAACP. And
yeah.
I guess perhaps you probably have some concerns about. Are you familiar with the Time article?
Yes, I remember that. But you know, it's interesting that I'd have an afternoon to spend here with you and listen to the discussions here as it relates to media manipulation, is what I call it.
Yes.
We had the same kind of problems in the States. I think, and I feel on safe ground to suggest that whenever there's an opportunity to create some notion of schism within the black community, it seems as if we can get all sorts of press on some things. But when we're talking about unity and unification, it's very difficult to get the same. The distortions are much, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little later, on Jordan and Jackson, for example. I think that there's an ample play to suggest some disunity when in fact it's not as bad as one would have the impression that it is.
Louis, I'm going to pass for a minute. We'll come back to you later.
Okay.
I want to go to Dr. Zied. We've heard from Louis what the Andrew Young resignation has meant to the black community. Dr. Zied, I wonder from your vantage point as a Palestinian, how do you view the Andrew Young resignation?
I must say the Andrew Young resignation came to us as a confirmation of a long-held conviction, a conviction held by Palestinians and myself, of the inordinate influence of the pro-Israeli lobby on the foreign policy of the United States. We find it extraordinary for a country, a great power like the United States, that its ambassador could not talk to accredited representative of the United Nations, of the Palestine Liberation Organization, that an ambassador of the United States could not talk to this man at his free will to discuss issues that are of tremendous importance, not only to the United States, but to the world at large, involving the world community, particularly in Andrew Young's role at the time, impending role at the time of being the Security Council President. This inordinate influence of the pro-Israeli lobby in the United States has, in our conviction, done tremendous damage for the role of the United States in Middle East. To imagine that here is a great power could not play its role in its own capacity as it sees fit is extraordinary. That's one aspect. This is also, we believe, is confirmed on another aspect which was referred to by Mr. Carter, though in a different light, the question of media manipulation. Anybody who's familiar with the role of the media in relation to the Middle East conflict would appreciate the tremendous influence of the pro-Israeli lobby on media related to the Middle East. The issue, for example, of the Palestinians being painted as a terrorist organization, of the PLO represented as a terrorist organization, is an incredible role, where we hear, for example, that when a Palestinian throws a bomb in Tel Aviv or something like that, he's called a terrorist. Yet for the Israelis to send their bombers with napalm and cluster bombs on refugee camps and villages in Lebanon and elsewhere, this is often omitted or referred to as retaliation, creating justification for an extraordinary amount of terrorism, be it state terrorism or otherwise. This, I think, the role of the media on the Middle East conflict should be appreciated by all. This is, I think, the aspects of the Andrew Young role as I saw it, anyway.
I'd like to move back to you, Louis, and I know some segments have questioned the participation of the black community in international issues, particularly relating to this issue we're discussing, the Palestinian issue. What do you feel about that? What do you think the role of the black community is and ought to be in the questions such as the Middle East question vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue?
Well, first of all, any group that would suggest to Black America that they have no right to participate in international affairs really don't know what they're talking about. That's the first thing. And I try not to get emotional on that issue because we have had some who would entertain that kind of thinking. We've had a history, and I can feel it very strongly from the posture of the NAACP, where the founding of the Pan-African Congress took place at the turn of the century. We've always had concerns and interest in international affairs, and it should never be nullified by anyone suggesting that blacks should not engage in concerns that affect their lives here. Because what goes on in the Middle East certainly has some bearing on what happens to us here in this, in the United States, and that's true of any part of the world.
Could you just, perhaps for the purposes of our viewers, indicate some of the implications of what's happening in the Middle East for the community here, particularly the black community?
For example, if we have certain fluctuations that are associated with the price of oil, the first persons that will have difficulty on the domestic side will be us on any given occasion. And when I say us, I'm talking about the black and disadvantaged community. Therefore, we have those kinds of valid concerns. We talk in this country or in America about human rights, and this is why we say and take issue with the administration. And as I was saying to the good doctor, one of the things that has constantly bothered me are the implications associated with 242, Kissinger's role, quite frankly, and suggesting that there's an element in this world community, which happens in this particular issue to be Palestine, and that you don't talk to them. It's just utter foolishness and nonsense. And so, although I may not agree totally with Jesse Jackson's appearance and some of the things that may have occurred, I certainly defend him the right, the given right, to express his opinion as anybody else would express their opinion on that issue or any other issue.
Right. I want to go back to you, Dr. Zied, in terms of this whole question viewing it from your perspective, what's your viewpoint on the participation of the black community in the Palestinian question? How do you feel about these allegations that the black community perhaps should concentrate on domestic issues and leave these international issues such as the Palestinian question to the United Nations and others who are more capable of dealing with them?
I was very interested when I met Mr. Carter this afternoon that he was carrying a button which read human rights, everybody's business. That to me confirms a very basic principle that the human rights of people throughout the world are of concern to every human being, be black or white, be in the United States, a Jew or non-Jew or whatever his background. This is certainly a basic fundamental principle. So the issue that the blacks of the United States should have no meddling in the Middle East affairs is nonsense. The other point, which is also equally clear, besides the point that Mr. Carter referred to, that the issues of the Middle East do affect the everyday life affairs of blacks in the United States, be it in relation to oil or in relation to a possible conflict in the case of war. It was, I think, Jessy Jackson who said, and quite rightly, that if it's a hot war, we are the first to die, and if it's a cold war, we are the first to starve. So the issue does affect blacks in the United States, but not only blacks in the United States, it affects Canadians of all colors, and affects people of all the world, because the issue of the Middle East involves a vital and strategic area of tremendous importance to the world at large. This is another point. And the third point I want to emphasize, where particularly I think the blacks of the United States should have a role in relation to the Palestine problem, and that is namely because the blacks of the United States are people who should be concerned about human rights. They are disadvantaged people. They are people who have at least experienced oppression, be it at some stage or to this day. It's up to them to decide. It's not for me to say, but and certainly this is the same issue with the Palestinians. The Palestinian problem is fundamentally this, is a people who have been expelled and uprooted from their land, and their land given away to somebody else. And those who have remained, the few who have remained, apart from the ones who have been deliberately expelled and uprooted from their land, the ones who have remained have been subjected to an oppressive foreign occupation, the manifestations of which are known to anybody who cares to look at the situation of the Palestinians under occupation in the West Bank or even in territory occupied before 1948. Manifestations of this are seen in relation to destruction of homes. Over 20,000 homes have been destroyed in the West Bank alone since 1967. Their land is being expropriated illegally and in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. They are being tortured in Israeli prisons, and a variety of aspects of their human rights are being violated. These are aspects that are of concern to all human beings, and particularly to the blacks in the United States. They appreciate this, they should understand this, and we as oppressed people sympathize with oppression anywhere else, and we expect other oppressed people to sympathize with us. This is one aspect. The other aspect where I think also the blacks of the United States and throughout the world, in Africa and elsewhere, should be aware of, namely that Israel has a community of interests with South Africa, a country that is well known for its apartheid policies, and Israel not only supports and cooperates with South Africa, but gives it very positive support in terms of commercial and military training as well as military supplies. The visit by Forster in 1976 and the treaty, the agreement signed between Rabin and Forster, the Prime Minister of South Africa, 1976, indicating cooperation, both technical and commercial, is manifest. We know that South Africa receives direct military aid in personnel and equipment from Israel. There is training also in anti-guerrilla warfare from the Israeli experts. Various presidents of African nations have testified to this. This role of Israel in South Africa is certainly should be known to people who care about human rights and the rights of countries like Namibia and other African countries. The same situation, of course, is known to occur in support of Israel for Rhodesia, for the whites in Rhodesia. Another point I'd like to say that even in Israel itself, the practices that are applied by the Israeli state are discriminatory on the basis of religion or race, very much an apartheid in themselves. And this is, I think, an aspect that the media tend to underplay, and the blacks, as well as all other people, should be aware of this, that the system of racial discrimination that exists in Israel against the Arabs and other groups, even Jewish blacks, are discriminated against in Israel. People who have come in from Africa, Jewish immigrants from Africa or India, are discriminated against and treated as a second-class citizen, while needless to say, the Arabs, be they Muslims or Christians, under occupation are the third-class citizens, who I mentioned already how they are treated.
Right. I was going back to you for a minute. There's been some confusion caused, I know, here in Canada by the Time article that we referred to earlier. There's some suggestion that there was a rift in the black community. You've spoken to a bit on that. I wonder if you could perhaps clarify for us what the position of the NAACP is regarding the Palestinian question.
Okay, let me try to handle that if I can in this manner. The NAACP supports the right of the permanency of the Palestinian homeland, total self-determination and autonomy. Obviously, we recognize the rights of Israel's existence. With regard to the question of communication with the PLO, we feel it is a duly and proper role of the United States administration through the U.S. State Department and other ancillary government agencies to initiate full peace negotiations. And that includes the recognition of the Palestinian persons, bodies. We feel further that a no-talk policy regarding the PLO or any other group recognized as legitimate by the Palestinian people is non-productive and nonsense. The recognition of the U.S. Government agencies as a proper negotiating force for foreign policy determinations does not discourage, nor do we, the right of any American citizen to discuss, communicate with groups or individuals that they feel comfortable with on any given subject matter, be it foreign or domestic. We would only hope that some of our personal ambassadors would go on their missions a little better prepared in terms of factual information. But this basically and clearly points out what our position is on this.
Right. Dr. Zied, in terms of concrete, practical things that the black community and others who identify with the Palestinian situation, what kinds of suggestions or what kinds of things would be helpful, in your opinion, to the situation in Palestine at the current time? What kinds of things, what kinds of support?
As I indicated earlier, the Palestine problem is basically a problem of human rights, of people whose human rights have been taken away from them, and they have been uprooted from their land and denied the right of self-determination, which all other peoples in the world people recognize that they're entitled to. That is one aspect. And I also indicated another aspect, that the Palestine problem and its relation to the Middle East conflict, which is the fundamental and core issue of the Middle East conflict, also threatens both the daily lives of people throughout the world, but also threatens peace in the world at large. So in relation to both these issues, the moral and human rights issue, as well as the practical and pragmatic issue in terms of oil supplies and threat to peace, both of these issues concern everybody, black and white. And it is here, the only thing I can ask people throughout the world to do is that it is their duty as people, as human beings who care for human rights, that they should apply pressure on their governments to recognize the legitimacy of the injustices that have been, the legitimacy of the right of the Palestinian people, and recognize that tremendous injustice has been committed against the Palestinian people, and that this injustice must be corrected if we are to have peace in the Middle East. And the requirements are basically these: one, that the Palestinians, like all other peoples, must be entitled to have the right of self-determination, that they must be the only ones who determine their own destiny. The second thing, which is also a fundamental right, is that the right of return to their homes. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 13, states clearly every man has the right to leave his own country and to return to his own country. And this is the right that the Palestinians who have been thrown out from their homes have been demanding for the last 30 years. And the United Nations have repeatedly asserted and supported this right. And yet Israel refuses to comply with it, and countries like the United States and Canada, who have power at least to influence the policies of Israel, should apply pressure, economic or otherwise, to make Israel comply with the will of the world body and the will of the nations of the world at large. I think this is all I would expect from people. And
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time on the program. I want to thank you both for appearing, Dr. Zied, to perhaps give us some insights into what the Palestinian question is all about. To you, Louis, in terms of clarifying some of the confusion that's been created here in the black community and the community at large in terms of the black community in the United States participation in this whole issue. Thank you both for appearing on Black Horizons. That's our program for the day. Thank you for watching Black Horizons.
Hello, welcome to Black Horizons. I'm your host, Hamid Rasheed. In our Black Horizons program today, we'll be bringing you commentary and highlights of a general meeting and conference of the National Black Coalition of Canada held in Halifax's Holiday Inn early in November of this year. Before we proceed with the commentary and highlights, this thumbnail sketch of the history of the National Black Coalition of Canada. In October of 1969, black people from across Canada met at the Lord Simcoe Hotel in Toronto, and as a result of that meeting, the National Black Coalition of Canada was formed. 28 organizations participated in this founding meeting, and the first executive consisted of Dr. Howard McCurdy of Windsor, who was elected as chairman, Mr. Ed Clark of Toronto, who was elected as the Ontario representative, Roy Williams of Vancouver, who was elected as the Pacific representative, Dr. Clarence Bain of Montreal, who was elected as the representative from Quebec, the late Joe Drummond of St. John, New Brunswick, who was elected as a representative of New Brunswick, and H.A.J. Wedderburn of Nova Scotia, who was elected to represent that province. Dorothy Wills of Montreal was the executive secretary. The NBCC was created expressly to be a catalyst for bringing together Canada's black community into a united body for a common purpose. The welding into a single body of such a diversified and geographically dispersed group was an undertaking of immense proportions and proved to be a Herculean task, as Canada's black community embodied almost as many different political persuasions, cultural interests, economic differences, religious and educational preferences as the general community at large. Over the ensuing years since 1969, the National Black Coalition of Canada has run an erratic course, often coming precariously close to disaster on the shoals of disorganization. Finally, in September of 1977, a task force was appointed to examine the structure of the organization and to determine its relevance to the needs and aspirations of the black population of Canada. The Task Force Committee has worked diligently since its formation in 1977 in an attempt to revitalize the failing National Black Coalition of Canada. Early in November, Canada's black community met in historic Halifax, the mecca of Canada's black community, to approve plans for a revitalized National Black Coalition of Canada. Approximately 160 delegates from across Canada, from British Columbia to Nova Scotia, gathered at the Holiday Inn in Halifax to discuss a revised constitution for the organization, a program of activities, and to elect a slate of officers. We took our Black Horizons crew to Conference Center to capture the proceedings for our viewers. As part of the conference proceedings, Roy States of Montreal, the individual responsible for convening the meeting where the task force was appointed in 1977, was honored for his many years of service to Canada, and particularly to the black community of Canada and to the National Black Coalition. In commenting on the near demise of the organization in 1977, States says that the NBCC collapsed. The chairman could not be located. The treasurer would not answer phone calls. The regional chairman of Quebec was not interested. The regional chairman of Ontario could not be located. In the meantime, there was correspondence, bills, and even lawyers' letters that were coming to him as executive secretary of the National Black Coalition of Canada. It appeared, he says, that I was very much alone. It was shortly after this that he unilaterally called a national meeting to discuss the plight of the National Black Coalition of Canada.
We called that meeting in September. It was unconstitutional. I arbitrarily called it. I had difficulties with people who said I was wrong in doing so. But I was pleased with the people that turned up. They suffered it. They gave us Nova Scotia. And through the day it was encouraging. And when the inter-committee was set up, I returned back to Montreal feeling that something had been accomplished. But with the convention here in Halifax this weekend, I'm accelerated with the enthusiasm, the number of people. It just seems that they use in British history between during the period of Oliver Cromwell, they call it the interregnum. And it just seems like we had an interregnum, but the king still lives.
During the business sessions, the delegates dealt with a number of resolutions concerning issues of domestic and international concern to Canada's black community. Resolutions dealing with the criminal justice system, the media, the black church, bilingual communication, education, affirmative action, and police community relations were some of the issues debated. In the area of criminal justice, it was decided that a lawyers' panel should be established immediately, consisting of 8 members from across Canada, to investigate and report upon the extent and nature of racially motivated mistreatment, unfairness, or injustice experienced by blacks by the criminal justice system throughout Canada, and to formulate appropriate recommendations for a response by the black community at both the national and local level. Further, the committee was to examine all legislation, policies, regulation, affecting black immigrants, and to develop an action program designed to accomplish changes in law where necessary and fair treatment. The committee was also charged with the responsibility of formulating an official position for the National Black Coalition and its constituents on constitutional change, especially as it relates to the 2 founding peoples and the vesting of provisions for individual liberties and non-discrimination against minority groups. In the area of the media, it was decided by the delegates in attendance at the meeting that an affirmative action and communications committee would be established to urge the application of affirmative action and contract compliance in the media. Also, the committee would be charged with providing training courses for individuals seeking careers in the field of communication. In a timely debate on the black church, the following resolution was passed. Whereas the black church is the oldest surviving black institution in Canada, and whereas in most communities they represent the only meeting place for black people, and whereas in the past the church has seemingly been ignored in efforts to achieve social and political change, and whereas cooperation between the National Black Coalition of Canada and the church would benefit black people, Therefore, be it resolved that the National Black Coalition of Canada consult with the various bodies of the Black Church to obtain their advice as to the best approach to initiate a program of communication and cooperation to air mutual interests. In the area of international issues, resolutions were adopted in support of the Patriotic Front, the Southwest Africa People's Organization, and the African National Congress in South Africa. In discussing the Middle East crisis, the following resolution was referred to the NBCC Executive for action. Whereas the World Forces of Liberation, of which the National Black Coalition of Canada is proud to be a part, are emerging forces, and it is to us that the future belongs. And whereas solidarity is an important weapon for helping the people of the world overcome oppression and injustice, and whereas the Palestinian people constitute an indivisible national unit, and Palestine is their natural homeland, therefore be it resolved that the National Black Coalition of Canada go on record as supporting the just struggle of the Palestinian people, the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the creation of an independent Palestinian state, the right of the Palestinian people to return to their homes, the necessity of Israeli adhering to UN resolutions regarding complete Israeli withdrawal from the territories occupied illegally since 1948, and the support of the Palestine Liberation Organization is the Palestinian people's sole legitimate voice and representative. Speaking on the current constitutional debate, Dr. Howard McCurdy of Windsor, Ontario, was very forceful in seconding a motion dealing with enshrinement of human rights in the new Canadian Constitution.
There has been a great deal of debate among the provinces on the issue of entrenchment of human minority rights. And it has been the position of the previous government that such rights should be entrenched. This in opposition to provinces, especially those provinces with progressive conservative governments. We now have a federal government which is a progressive conservative government, and one might anticipate, in view of the behavior of Joe Clark in reference to his colleagues in his party, that he would oppose the entrenchment of all of our rights in the Constitution of all of Canada. And we want to make it damn clear that we're not going to tolerate a situation in which our rights will be deprived on the basis of interprovincial negotiation.
Following the business sessions, we talked to Jessy Dillard of Victoria, BC, the delegate who traveled the greatest distance to attend the conference, about his views on the National Black Coalition of Canada.
Jess, you've come all the way from Vancouver, Victoria Island, to Halifax for this conference of the National Black Coalition of Canada. Why would you travel all that distance?
It's an easy question on one hand and a hard question on the other. It's an easy question from the perspective that we are isolated in Victoria when there's a total of some 300 black people, and it becomes necessary and imperative that we have or feel that we have national representation. So that's the easy part. The hard part is that in any national organization, any founding organization, any time that something is starting off, it's like giving birth. It's painful, and you wonder if it's going to live, and you wonder if it's going to be healthy. And I guess that's the hard part. It's because you have these fears and doubts, but you also have these hopes and desires that it will be successful. And you try to give it your best and make it live. So that's why I've come this far. I was involved with the originating of Black United Front. I was also involved with the originating the Victoria Black People Society, and we need representation. We need to know what's going on across the country, and a national organization can do that.
So a national organization is important to you in Victoria.
Oh, yeah.
How has the conference gone, in your opinion? Have you been happy, disappointed? What are your impressions of the conference to this point?
Well, I'm a real cynic about conferences, because I feel that oftentimes the best does not come out, at least on the floor. It usually comes out when people sit down and talk as we talked before we went on camera, or as people talk over dinner or breakfast or whatever. So my expectations of a conference aren't that great in terms of what happens on the floor. And I guess I am, so that qualifies where I'm at with regards to the conference. I think that it's put together as well as a conference can be put together. I'm certainly comfortable, and things have been available and all of that. I guess what I would really like to see would be people preparing themselves and addressing themselves to issues, real issues, as opposed to working themselves into a great lather over something that is, in my opinion, off the track. So I would really like to see people less frustrated with their lot in life with regards to why they are at a conference. But coming from Victoria, I got up at 5 o'clock like Thursday morning, caught a 6:45 plane to Vancouver, a 9 o'clock plane in Vancouver, arrived here at about 9 o'clock Friday night, put my bags down, came into the banquet, heard the end of that, and then collapsed, and then was up this morning bright and early. You can't relax. I mean, you come tired, you arrive tired, jet lagged, and it's not conducive.
So what do you think the future holds for the National Black Coalition of Canada? What do you think the chances are?
I think our backs are against the wall as a national organization. I think that we have to sink or swim. I think that without representation, I think that we are doomed to remain where we are now. And I don't think that we can expect our politicians to represent us on all of the issues that affect us. I wish we could, but we are not that powerful as a group yet. I mean, I would really like to see politicians, for instance, come by and see us when it's not election time, or when they're not providing us with a banquet. I would like to see them see us under those circumstances, and that would say that perhaps it's a two-way street. So we need a national organization. We need to have our concerns heard. If you don't speak a language, if you come from another country, if you don't know how the system works, if you live in a community where you're isolated, you don't have any tools to work with. If you feel threatened by offices and buildings and systems, you need somebody to help you. And you need it from the bottom to the top. A national organization will give us some of those inroads, and I think it will help not only us, but it will help our children. It will give us a sense of dignity and pride. It will enable us to eradicate some of the stereotypes of things that we see on TV, and not just for black people, because it's a national organization. While it, on one hand, is really for a select group, on the other hand, it's for everybody. I mean, if I get strong, then you get strong, all right? Because we all are in it together. I mean, pollution affects all of us. Gas prices affect all of us. Illiteracy affects all of us. Poor health services affect all of us. Good health services affect all of us. And so a national organization can help at another part of the whole community or the whole situation with regards to black people.
Right. Well, Jess, I hope that you'll get a chance. I trust that you've taken or arranged for about 2-day vacation period when you return so that you can recover from this tedious and tiring affair of attending a conference in Halifax all the way from the West Coast. I want to thank you for appearing on our Black Horizons program.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Howard McCurdy of Windsor was the first chairman of the National Black Coalition of Canada. We talked to him about his views on the NBCC since its formation. Reflecting on the past 10 years, he said, it may be that the National Black Coalition of Canada tried to bite off more than it could chew in terms of embracing ideals and sophisticated structures which we weren't quite capable of implementing because there hadn't been adequate opportunities across the nation to discuss what a national organization might be. In recent times, he says, it seems that we have gained a new vision of how we can work together. I asked McCurdy what he felt about the future of the National Black Coalition of Canada.
Well, I think that the first priorities of the NBCC is twofold. One, an immediate program of fundraising in the black community. I think that is a sine qua non of the development of the NBCC over the next few years. And secondly, I think that we're going to have to send representatives representing this national organization into local communities to contact people whom we could not have contacted before because of the kind of structures that the NBCC originally had, as well as because of the hiatus that the NBCC has had in terms of real programming over this period of reevaluation. And those two things are most fundamental. But of course, you know as well that we've embarked upon developments in organizing the resource groups that were the promise of the NBCC in the first place, in education and in law and in affirmative action and so on. I hope that we can see in not too distant future development of contacts with the churches, resource groupings and labor and so on. This is very important because the primary function that the NBCC must fulfill at the outset is to make available to black people all over Canada the kinds of intellectual and leadership and skill resources and in terms of human persons available for help that many black communities in this country need.
The delegates to this annual meeting elected Al Mercury of Toronto to the position of Executive Secretary. We talked to him about the conference and the future of the National Black Coalition. Al Mercury from Toronto, you've come all the way to Halifax for this meeting of the NBCC. The meetings to try to revitalize the NBCC. What have you felt about the meeting to this point?
I feel very, very optimistic. I definitely feel that we're on the right path. There's an attitude and a cohesiveness being projected that more than augurs well for the rebirth of the organization.
So then you feel optimistic? You think the NBCC is on its way back to becoming
Not
revitalized?
only is on its way back, in my considered opinion, it will come back stronger than it has ever been, and I think it's long overdue.
Right. What kinds of things do you think the NBCC is going to have to occupy itself with in order to maintain the kind of momentum that's been generated at this conference?
I think some of the issues they're going to have to address are the very real issues that face the visible minorities in Canada. We pride ourselves quite often, falsely I believe, on the fact that we don't have the problems that seem to be inherent within the United States of America with their visible minorities. I think the defensive mechanism that's inbred within each individual, particularly when economic times are a little tougher than normal, is bringing out a side to the Canadian character that I don't think any of us really expected existed to the depth in which it's manifested itself, particularly against the new Asian immigrants who are coming in and blacks who have come in the last decade or so.
Lewis Carter of the NSACP spoke to the delegates this evening, and he talked about this question of compassion and why blacks feel that they must always be tolerant and exercise compassion. I thought that was a very interesting comment that he made, and I wondered what your feeling was, particularly in terms
I think some of the things the black community is going to have to do is recognize that they must patronize the merchants, the professionals, the technicians, such as mechanics, etc., within their own community. In other words, let that dollar circulate not only to the community as a whole, but to their own community specifically. That is to say, I don't say patronize an individual because he is black, but I certainly say where his skill and ability are equal to that of anybody else, give him the preference.
What about looking at this question of funding from another point of view? What about the future of the NBCC from a financial point of view in terms of being able to generate the kind of funds for a program? What do you feel the NBCC will be able to do in this particular area?
I think they'll have to do the same as every other national organization. They've not only got to call upon their own people to give up their own personal wealth, but they must also be prepared to systematically go on a prolonged, continuing fundraising campaign. Let's be quite honest about it. In the voluntary sector, there is no easy way to raise money. It's an arduous task that you must address yourself to. For instance, we're putting on a fundraising dinner in Toronto next week, and we expect to realize several $1,000s from that. This is the NBCC putting on a dinner in tribute to a black politician, the Honorable Lincoln Alexander, QC, MP, who was the Minister of Labor for the federal government. Now, you may not be aware of it, but he's originally a Toronto-born individual who moved to Hamilton after the Second World War, and he's been extremely successful, not only in his business and personal life, but also in the political arena. I believe he's been the sitting MP for the last 3 terms.
What about this question of organizing? What is the NBCC going to have to do in the area of organizing?
As far as I'm concerned, the way I regard it, the NBCC must organize itself right down to the individual community level and also on a provincial level or regional level, if you will, and this will give the firm base that your national level needs in order to be a viable entity and have input into the decisions that face not only the blacks in Canada, but the Canadian community as a whole. Many people are not aware of it, but we too have a stake in the question of separatism, for instance. How many people know, for instance, that blacks have been in Canada for 374 years, longer than any other specific ethnic group?
Other than the French?
Other than the French?
And the English?
No, we came before the English. Yeah. But it's interesting to note that blacks have been in Canada longer than blacks have been on some islands in the West Indies. Yet we tend to regard the West Indies as being the domicile of blacks. Canada has been the domicile of blacks much prior to some of the West Indian islands. In addition to that, how many people are aware that blacks are numbered among the United Empire Loyalists? There are blacks who came here when the United Empire Loyalists fled the American colonies and made Canada their home. These records can be traced through old family Bibles and records of slaves, etc.
Particularly here in Nova Scotia.
Now, yes, in Nova Scotia, but blacks also settled in copious numbers in Ontario. How many know that the blacks fought in the War of 1812, 13, and 14, for instance? There were all black units. There was one unit known as Captain Runchy's Colored Corps. They were all black except for the commanding officer, who was white. But the point is, blacks have fought for this country, they have a great deal invested in this country, and for people to make the stupid remarks I've heard in some quarters that you should go back where they come from is absolute nonsense. We have a stake here, we have a vested interest, and we'd better face it. We're here to remain, and we intend to do our part as part of a united Canada.
The black community of Canada is at a crossroads of many routes which it can take. There are many options now open to us, and we have to make choices. The choices that we make will determine, perhaps irreversibly, the destiny of future generations of blacks in this country. By the year 2000, only 21 years away, what will be the position of blacks in Canada? If we want to ensure the best possible situation, we must develop an institution or a force that can act as a central unifying force, something black people can give their allegiance to, an institution that will serve the black community and give us a sense of common purpose and direction. Therefore, let us be positive in our outlook. Let us develop and encourage an institution that will provide the black community with the capacity to function adequately in the 21st century as a people. The decision to act or not to act is ours today, but the verdict will be made by our children in the future. I trust they will find us not guilty of procrastination, indecision, and lack of foresight. That's our program for today. Thank you for watching. See you next time.